Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we will be talking about my updated election prediction between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Now we are just 7 days, exactly 1 week away from Election Day. Next Tuesday is Election Day. So we are now in the final stretch of the campaign. We have to start developing our final predictions before the election, and this is a step closer. So we are still waiting on a final batch of very accurate polls that we use to, of course, develop our final forecast. For example, you've got Iowa, and Selzer, Iowa State, we typically don't talk about, but an extremely accurate pollster, Selzer and Company, that gets it spot on every time, showed Trump ahead by only 4 points in Iowa after the debate. This was early September. He won it by 8 in 2020, so that'd be a 4 point reduction. Now, that was a huge wake up call for the Trump campaign, and we'll see if he has gained since then. Again, this was right after the debate, so obviously things have changed, and we will see how they have changed. So, today, of course, we're going to be talking about an updated look at this race, where everything stands right before Election Day, with just 1 week, of course, until Election Day. So, really, a major theme before we get into a state by state prediction, of course, a major theme of this, predicting this race really has to do with a very similar situation than we saw in 2016, because in 2016, of course, there was that famous hidden Trump vote. These voters that were going to vote for Trump, but were really embarrassed to admit it in polls most of the time, and ultimately, Trump's support just wasn't picked up in polling. But now, after we have rallies like this at Madison Square Garden, of course, this rally that has been dubbed extremely racist, based off of what guest speakers said at the rally, it really emphasizes how in this election, I almost guarantee you, looking at where we are in polling, that there will be a hidden Harris vote. Harris is down in Pennsylvania. She's down in Arizona in the average of polls. She's down in Georgia and North Carolina. Of course, narrow margins. It really doesn't mean anything if Trump is ahead by half a point here or if Harris is ahead by half a point there. But she's down. And I can almost guarantee you, based off these results, that Harris will be outperforming her margin in many of these states. As I said in a post recently, there is all the reason for there to be a hidden Harris vote, a significant hidden Harris vote, right? People who have traditionally voted Republican, never really even considered voting Democrat in their lives, but, because of this really, outdated style of campaigning that the Trump campaign has taken on, just whatever, you know what I mean, everything related to the Trump campaign and just fears about what another Trump term would look like. These traditionally conservative and Republican voters, a lot of them, although they wouldn't like to admit it in polls and wouldn't like to admit it to their friends and family, they will secretly be voting for Harris. Meanwhile, there is no reason for there to be a hidden Trump vote. It is now a norm, a complete norm, considering that he led most of this race, right? He was the favorite to win. There is no reason for anyone to be embarrassed to say that they are voting for Donald Trump anymore. That is obviously, displayed. That's obviously expressed through, how much you see Trump yard signs, flags, and stuff like that. So with that being said, let's get into this prediction. First off, we will start with our safe Democratic states. So these are typically states that will be decided by a 15% margin or higher. So the states we never talk about, right? You can see them all here that I've outlined. You go from DC, which is an 86-point margin for Harris, all the way down to Oregon, which is exactly a 15-point margin for Harris, and everything in between. It's the states that are going to go to Kamala Harris or would have gone to Joe Biden by a safe margin, or not necessarily by a safe margin, but would have gone to any Democratic nominee, regardless of who they are. Now, as for Donald Trump, he has the same set of states, except, of course, in different states. So, across the Midwest, he's going to sweep the election. Um, Nebraska's third district as well, obviously. These states that you never hear in the news because, regardless of who the Republican nominee is this year, they're not going to anyone else. They're not going to vote for a Democrat. So that puts Harrison Wallace always, of course, in every forecast at an early advantage with 181 electoral votes, Trump and Vance at 113. Next up, we'll fill in our likely Democratic states. These are 5 to 15% margins for the Harris Wallace ticket. So these are the Colorados of the world, New Mexico, Minnesota, Virginia, Maine, New Hampshire. Occasionally, you'll have Nebraska's second as well. Occasionally, you'll have a really close poll in one of these states, and everyone freaks out. Everyone goes crazy. Same with these likely Republican states as well. For example, in Kansas, we had a +5 poll for Trump. He won it by 15, or yeah, when you round 15 in 2020. So people went crazy. Minnesota went to Biden by 7. Yesterday, there was a Harris +2 or +3 or some poll in Minnesota. Everyone freaked out. But in the end, these are outliers. These are going to go for the Democrat basically no matter what. The polling isn't indicating any sort of, or the average of polls, I should say, isn't indicating any sort of serious whatever, upset in any of these states. When you look at the margins from 2020, Colorado, you had Biden plus 14, New Mexico, Biden plus 11, Virginia, Biden plus 10, New Hampshire plus 7. These states aren't really that close. And with Harris, really being able to unite this Democratic Party, get them enthusiastic, get them to donate, she won't have a problem turning out Democrats in these traditionally Democratic states. As for Donald Trump, he has his set of likely states as well. The most, or the highest margin of them, among them, South Carolina for sure, Alaska for sure, maybe marginal changes. Alaska, there's talk about becoming more Democratic over the years. South Carolina seems stagnant. But of course, they are going to vote for Donald Trump. They won't be, there won't be any sort of upset come election day. And then, I brought up Iowa earlier because we had this really shocking poll from Selzer that showed, here it is. We've had very few polls, only two Harris versus Trump polls in Iowa. But you can see this was September 8th through 11th, right after the debate. Trump was ahead by 4% when you include RFK Jr. and Chase Oliver, both of which will be on the ballot. And again, that was a huge wake-up call for the Trump campaign that he was losing big time. He won it by 8 in 2020, and Iowa wasn't really a state, these rural white states where Joe Biden did have a strong appeal in 2020. These rural states were not the ones that we expected Kamala Harris to do much better in than where Biden was when he was back in the race, even in 2024. So again, to see Harris making any sort of gains at all in Iowa was a shocker. It would have been a shocker to see her matching Trump in Iowa, but she was no, but she was exceeding the margin from 2020 by 4 points. So again, we need, and I didn't mention this before, but Ann Selzer will release her final poll the weekend before Election Day, so that will be critically, critically important. But as of now, it was +4 right after the debate. I assume Trump has made some more gains there. It's now over 5% margin in Iowa, over 5% margin in Ohio. He won them both by 8 points in the 2020 election. It probably remains just about stagnant. So now we will move on to Maine's 2nd district. That's likely Republican to the surprise of nobody. And then you've got two very, very, very important states. You've got Texas and you've got Florida. Of course, Texas, we'll start with Texas. Texas went to Trump by a likely margin in the 2020 election, 5.6%. This one's interesting. You've got rapidly trending left suburbs, which I do believe will become more Democratic in 2024, that is. But you also do have an increasingly conservative, socially conservative, that is, a string of Latino counties along the Rio Grande Valley. You can just see, even from 2016 to 2020, while Biden made gains in the statewide, the margin was 43 to 52. Sorry, 43 to 52 in 2016. It became a 46 to 52 point margin in the 2020 race. Despite that, you can see, just based off the map colors, the Rio Grande Valley actually became more Republican. This was under Hillary Clinton. She had, for example, Webb County, 52-point margin. 4 years later, Biden would win it by only 23. That's insane. That is really insane. So Harris, I don't think, honestly, has much appeal. I think that these Latino voters will continue to trend towards the right. But then again, you've got the suburbs, which are saving Democrats currently in Texas. So, if these suburbs continue to grow in population rapidly as they are, right, the Rio Grande Valley is not growing in population. The suburbs are rapidly. They already have a high population. Then we will continue to see Texas trend to the right. Now, I do think it becomes, for what it's worth, I do think it becomes a bit more Democratic, 0.3% margin. 0.3% shift towards the left. However, it does still stay in the realm of likely Republican. Then you've got Florida. Florida only voted for Trump in the 2020 election by 3.4%. So this would require, as you can see in my forecast, Republicans, Trump gaining 2.3% to make it a 5.8% margin. But when you look at, this is just basic logic here. You go from 2016, Trump won it by 1.2%. 2020, he won it by 3.4. So while the nation as a whole became more, whoops, let me see if I can get it here. So while the nation as a whole became more democratic, I'm trying to compare so you can see. The nation as a whole obviously became more democratic from 2016 to 2020, right? Trump won in 2016, Biden won in 2020, obviously, just to get that out of the way. But Florida, as you can see, became more Republican. That is really insane because there was once a swing state. That is really important. So 3.4% margin in 2020. You look at the governor's race in 2022, DeSantis won by almost 20 points. I mean, that's unbelievable. So yeah, you'd expect Trump to make just enough gains for him to get over 5% margin. But of course, this relates to Pennsylvania. I mean, really, these remarks that Trump made about Puerto Rico that will actually have a, marginal, but it will have some effect really on the 2024 race. How Puerto Ricans vote, they're significant in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, especially. So, with that being said, we are now left with our 7 core battleground states, all of which I can guarantee you will not be likely or safe margins. They will all be within a 5% margin. Now, right now, Harris and Walz are at 226 electoral votes, very narrow lead ahead of Trump and Vance, who are at 219. So, starting with Harris and Walz, they're lean states, so 1 to 5% margins here now. They have two. And this continues with what I've been saying for literally months now. I don't think I've ever had either of these states below a 1% margin for the Democrats. Yes, it's narrow, but it is still a 1% margin or higher in both of these states. That's Michigan and that's Pennsylvania. I mean, again, coming back to this, again, there will be this hidden Harris vote. So in the states where she is already performing right fine, and you see in Michigan, she is ahead in the average of polls. That's all where she needs to be. And once these really hidden Harris voters do come and turn out on election day, she will win the state. For example, she's almost ahead by a point in Michigan. That's pretty solid. In Pennsylvania, she's down, but it's just about razor thin. And you might notice I never bring up polls because if Trump is ahead by 0.3, or if Harris is ahead by 0.7, or if Trump is ahead by a whole point, or if Harris is ahead by a point and a half, it really doesn't matter because polling can so easily be off just a little bit. Please keep that in mind. Do not, if you're supporting Trump or you're supporting Harris, please do not hurt your mental health like I have by caring so much about a 0.5% shift in the polls. It doesn't matter. Polls are going to be off. They're not going to be spot on to the 10th of a percentage point. Do not worry about polling leads like this. It's a 50-50 race in the polling. Just think of it like that. So Michigan and Pennsylvania, I think that Harris will keep. When you look at 2020, Michigan went to Biden by 2.8% margin, Pennsylvania by 1.2% margins. These are not, right, like 0.2% margins in Georgia or 0.3% margins in Arizona. These are actually something of a lead. These are just about 50-50 margins, right? You can't call these sort of races accurately. But Michigan and Pennsylvania, right, you can call these races somewhat accurately. Biden almost won Michigan by 3. I don't think that Harris can possibly lose enough support looking at how different, how much more weak of a candidate Trump is now than he was in 2020. I don't see how Harris could lose 3% in Michigan or even in Pennsylvania, 1.5% in Pennsylvania. When you've got rapidly trending left suburbs who are clearly turning out in the early voting and, pretty stagnant rural population. Harris, I don't think, will suffer that many losses from 2020 compared to 2020 in these rural areas to offset the gain she is making among white women specifically, but just white voters as a whole, white parents especially, in the suburbs, for example, in the state of Pennsylvania, around Philadelphia. There's just not enough math to add up there. Pennsylvania and Michigan will go lean for Harris. Now, as for Donald Trump, he does not have a single lean state. So that means that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 states in total will be tilt. That's insane. Tilt is a less than 1% margin. 5 states are less than 1% margins. You never see that in 2020. There were only 3, and even that's a lot. In 2016, you had 4. That was really pushing it. I don't think we have ever seen 4 tilt states. When you go back, 2008, there were 2. You never see 5 tilt states. But in my forecast, this is where we're at. Looking at the 2020 margins, you've got Wisconsin. That was just a 0.6% margin. Arizona, 0.3% margin. Georgia, 0.2% margin. So it becomes a question, how much will Kamala Harris lose in these states, if any? Will it be enough to flip these states in favor of Donald Trump? Well, Georgia, I think the answer is yes. Georgia, I should have saved for last, honestly, but I guess there's no going back now. We'll look at my forecast margins in the end, but this I think will be the closest election of any state, the closest state as of now. I think that Trump is ahead by what, 0.2, 0.3%, very similar to Biden's margin in 2020, just because, while Arizona, I think that the hidden Kamala vote will be more pronounced because here you have a lot of very traditional Republicans, right? This is where John McCain comes from. Of course, you're going to have, just naturally, of course, this is a more traditional conservative, traditional Republican state, just based off just based off of the historical politics in the state, of course, with politicians like John McCain. And of course, you got the former Senator Jeff Flake voting for Kamala Harris. He said endorsing Kamala Harris. Um, and it's a rapidly growing Democratic state. Maricopa County growing in population, more suburbs. Suburbs will turn out for Harris. But Georgia, that's in stark contrast with Georgia. And I guess since I was just talking about Arizona there, I think that Arizona does go blue. I'm going way out of order here because Arizona should be like the last or second to last one I characterized. But Arizona, as for all the reasons I just said, Arizona is a shocker. It's a huge upset, and I think it will go to Kamala Harris. It's not letting me move this. Oh, there we go. But Arizona is currently Donald Trump's best state in the average. Oh my God, in the average of polls here. And all right, I'm never getting it. You know what? I give up. I give up. But here, you could see Georgia, when you round, is a plus 1% margin for Trump. That's a decrease. Just the other day it was plus 2. Arizona is still plus 2. But looking at 2020, I think that Harris will actually make gains among many voters who just cannot stomach voting for Trump. Maybe they would have rather voted for 2020 Biden than they would for 2024 Harris. But the decline of Donald Trump, rallies like this mean that they simply cannot vote for him again. So Arizona, I think, goes blue. Georgia, I don't think there's enough room, and I don't think that Harris has much opportunity to gain. That's the difference from Arizona. She doesn't have enough room to gain among certain types of voters than she does in Arizona, right? Not enough more traditional conservatives, traditionally conservative independents, and um, I don't want to repeat this stupid media narrative, but the media is obsessed with talking about how African Americans are leaving the Kamala Harris. That's what polling shows every year. Or certain demographics are just hard to poll, like races. I don't know if she will, but it is a possibility that she does suffer losses in the core Atlanta metro area. In the end, I think that Trump flips it, but again, half a percentage point margin for him, maybe. We'll see. So that puts. Oh, okay. So Harrison Walls win. They're at 271. Trump and Vance are at 235. I do think that they win the presidency and vice presidency. So now we'll move on. Nevada, the early voting, everyone's obsessed with the early voting. I saw something, I don't know, I'm no expert on early voting, clearly, but I did see some that said whatever rural voters are like what I'm not even going to go into it honestly because it'd be way too hard to explain. But there's not enough evidence I see in the early voting to indicate a clear Democratic disadvantage in Nevada, and the polling looks honestly good for Democrats here because consistently they are underestimated in polling, in Nevada polling, that is specifically Nevada. I don't know why, but in 2022 they were. Even in 2016, Trump was expected to win Nevada, but Hillary Clinton did. So, there's not enough evidence to point towards Kamala Harris losing enough support from the 2.4% Biden won it by in 2020 for her to lose the state. 2.4% is significant. So it comes down to Wisconsin and North Carolina here. In North Carolina, I do think that Trump wins. And this is simple math. I mean, look, considering all my other states, right, I think that the election the election will be relatively stagnant compared to 2020. I know that's a hot take. I know no one is saying that, but it's the truth. I do think that it will be. Again, Arizona, she basically matches Biden's margin. Pennsylvania, literally does match Biden's margin, about 1%. But North Carolina did go to Trump, and it was by a significant margin, 1.3%. Harris doesn't have enough room to gain, right? Yes, she will gain in North Carolina. This is a trending blue state. This is a rapidly growing blue state, just in population alone. Democrats are gaining here, but 1.3% margin, there's not enough wiggle room. There's not enough room for Harris to gain. North Carolina, I am pretty certain, will go to Donald Trump. Finally, we got Wisconsin. As I'm sure many of you expected, Wisconsin will go blue. Now, this one, I'm honestly maybe the most skeptical of any Harris state, probably besides Arizona. Of course, Wisconsin only voted for Biden by zero point 0.6, and I'm skeptical because this is a state where Donald Trump really does have a lot of opportunity to gain, which is different from other states. You've got a lot of white working class voters, many who voted for him in 2016, and many who switched over to Biden in 2020. So while you had this demographic of white working class men switching over to Biden in 2020, I don't think that they're sold on Harris. I think that they're going to remember Trump's term in 2016, and ultimately it'll produce a state that's much more friendly to him than these other battleground states. I could very well see every single battleground state, besides Wisconsin, as well as North Carolina for the 1.3% margin in 2020, but every battleground state besides North Carolina and Wisconsin vote for Donald Trump. You could see Georgia blue and Wisconsin red. That is well within the realm of possibility. Not to mention, it was Biden's worst state in 2020 and Trump's best state, that is of the blue wall, Rust Belt states, right? Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. The best for Trump in 2016, the best for him in 2020. So while I do think that this margin will be razor thin, probably zero point 0.2 or 0.3%, she does carry the state. Here's my full forecast with all of my current predictions. Georgia's a 0.2% margin, North Carolina 0.9% margin, Arizona 0.1% margin. I'm so uncertain about Arizona, but I do think it narrowly falls in Harris's column. You've got Wisconsin a 0.4% margin. In Nevada, I'm pretty certain on 0.8% margin. Pennsylvania 1% margin, and Michigan 1.8% margin. So there it is. This is my updated election forecast 1 week out from Election Day. Harris and Walz win 287 electoral votes. Trump and Vance with 251. If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe down below. That really helps out a lot. Drop a comment to let me hear your thoughts on this, and I'll see you all later.